Hi, this is Mandy back with another video. Today I want to talk about NSS. I'm sure none of you really know what that is because it's something that I came up with, and unless you've listened to my radio shows, you probably don't know what that is. In the world full of acronyms, it might stand for something for something in your world, but probably not this thing. What I want to talk about today are autism spectrum disorders, and then this concept that I came up with called NSS, or for short, non-spectrum spectrumers. When I was doing my talk show last year, I started to bring material together when I was talking about kids who were diagnosed with autism spectrum disorders, and it occurred to me that there were a lot of parallels or similarities, or it might be helpful to compare the way that kids or those diagnosed with autism spectrum disorders think with those who are not diagnosed with autism spectrum disorders. So I came up with this term, non-spectrum spectrumers, so that you, the audience, can understand. Here's the clear line. Here's the category of people who are clinically and formally diagnosed with the disorder, autism spectrum disorders, and non-spectrum spectrum. Okay? And you'll see how I use these terms not to really separate so much, but really to integrate so that you can understand how this is the ways that we're similar. These are the specific ways why we're different, but why we might be different. So it helps you really understand your loved ones that you might be working with who are diagnosed with autism spectrum disorders. So let me say one more thing about autism spectrum disorders. This is a sidebar, but this is just something that you should know about me as a clinician. I'm very particular to use the word autism spectrum disorders, and I know it's a mouthful, and sometimes I might just say ASD for short, but I've really wanted to get away from the old terminology according to the DSM-5 diagnostic criteria of that umbrella, which formerly was the pervasive developmental disorders. Under the last and the prior DSM-4, there was an umbrella called pervasive developmental disorders, and underneath that umbrella were 5 diagnoses and 5 categories. One was autism, one was Asperger's disorder, one was childhood disintegrative disorder, the other was Rett's disorder, and then pervasive developmental disorder, NOS, not otherwise specified. And quite frankly, what I used to see in clinical diagnosis is that PDD-NOS category was used as sort of an umbrella catch-all diagnosis for those kids who didn't meet the full criteria for autism. I also want to say that Asperger's disorder is not in the new DSM-5. So unless your child was diagnosed with that back in the day, I tend to steer clear of that label, so to speak. And that's a whole nother video that I'll talk about. And people often confuse or use the term high functioning autism, which actually is not a clinical diagnosis. And I think that that does an injustice to the population, but I'll tell you why. And I'm looking at it from a lens of advocacy for the individuals diagnosed. Okay, so now that I gave you a little bit of background about the criteria, let me go back to this concept of non-spectrum spectrumers and autism spectrum disorders. One of the sort of pieces that I put together about these two populations is the way that technology might be helping the NSS category interact and react socially a little bit more like the stereotype or the traditional way that we see persons diagnosed with autism spectrum disorders interact with other people. Now, I'm not saying technology is responsible for creating autism necessarily, but what happens when we use and we're interacting so much with technology, if you really think about this, is that it takes, as far as socialization goes, right? It takes away a whole element of the person-to-person interaction piece that when we're reading nonverbal cues. So in a way, the younger generations who have been really inundated with technology, that are more comfortable with texting, more comfortable with, DMs, all of that non-face-to-face contact, or even video, send, video, receive, video, send, that type of thing really doesn't give a whole lot of opportunity to read social cues. So again, that's probably another topic for another time. So I hope that this kind of explained the why that I came up with this concept, and so you know what it is when I use it in the future videos. Thanks for watching.